They thought she was an easy target. In the middle of a quiet school parking lot, a group of cocky bullies slammed their knee into a black girl like no one would ever hold them accountable. But life loves irony, because 5 minutes later, the ground shook beneath 40 roaring Harleys as the Hells Angels rolled in like Judgment Day on wheels. What happened next? Let's just say the hunters suddenly remembered what fear tastes like. The clock had barely struck 3 when the final bell released Ridgeview High into its usual wave of chaotic freedom. Backpacks slapped against denim, car doors slammed, and laughter bounced across the walls in careless echoes. But at the far end of the parking lot, where the sunlight hit colder and the wind moved strangely still, everything felt just slightly off, as if the air itself knew something ugly was about to unfold. Ariel Johnson stepped out into that uneasy quiet with her notebook pressed tightly to her chest. It was only her 4th day at Ridgeview, and she already knew the parking lot was the worst place to linger after school. Too open, too exposed, too perfect for the type of people who hunted in packs. She walked with her shoulders tucked inward, hoping to slip through the cracks of the day before anyone noticed her. But someone already had. Brock Miller, 6 feet of quarterback swagger, varsity jacket arrogance, and the kind of smile that always meant trouble, leaned against his red Dodge Charger, with Tyler, Mason, and Jace flanking him like loyal guard dogs. The moment Ariel appeared, Brock's eyes sharpened. A slow, predatory grin crawled across his face. "There," he murmured to his crew. "The new girl." Tyler followed his gaze and let out a low whistle. "Walking alone again," Mason smirked. "Didn't even last a week. Either she's brave or stupid." But Jace said what all 4 were thinking. "No one's got her back. Easy target." Brock pushed off the car and rolled his shoulders like he was warming up for a game. "Perfect." Ariel heard footsteps behind her before she saw them. She froze, not visibly, just enough to catch her breath, then forced herself to keep walking. Eyes forward, steps steady, don't show fear. That was the rule her mother drilled into her before the move. Bullies feed off reactions. Baby, don't give them a meal. But Ridgeview wasn't a place where rules worked. The parking lot's chatter dimmed as Brock and his crew crossed the asphalt. Students glanced, hesitated, then pretended they didn't see anything. The silence that followed was unnatural, like the whole school inhaled and held its breath. Ariel finally turned. Brock blocked her path with one lazy step, hands in his pockets, smirk too wide to be friendly. "Leaving already?" he asked, voice dripping with mock sweetness. "We were just starting to get to know you." Tyler snickered behind him. Mason nudged Jace, whispering something that made them both laugh under their breath. Ariel's grip tightened around her bag strap. She fought the instinct to take a step back, but Brock moved forward anyway, invading her space like he owned the concrete beneath her shoes. "What's wrong?" he taunted. Not used to people saying hi, but it wasn't a greeting, it was a warning. Ariel held his stare, a quiet, controlled look that made Brock's smile falter for half a second before he masked it with irritation. Around them, the parking lot went silent again. No one intervened. At Ridgeview, predators picked their prey in broad daylight, and the herd simply looked away. Yet in the far corner of the lot, someone did notice. A lone biker, rough-bearded, tattooed forearms, boots planted beside a blackened chrome. Harley watched the scene with a stare too focused to be casual. He didn't move, didn't speak, but the grip he had on his handlebar tightened ever so slightly. No one else saw him. Not yet, but he saw everything. And Brock took another step toward Ariel, confidence dripping from every movement. "Out here," he said, voice low and cold. "We decide where you get to stand." Ariel swallowed hard and steadied her breath. She pulled her backpack closer against her side. Whatever came next was going to change everything. The space around them seemed to widen as the last cars pulled out of the parking lot. What should have been an open, harmless stretch of asphalt now felt like a stage one Ariel had never agreed to stand on. The wind tugged lightly at her braids, at the hem of her shirt, but her heartbeat was the only thing she could hear clearly. Brock didn't waste a second. "So," he said, circling her with lazy steps, eyes raking up and down like she was something he could inspect. "Where'd you come from again? Some rundown school on the south side?" Tyler snorted. Probably couldn't handle real competition. Mason cupped a hand to his ear dramatically. Speak up, girl. We can't understand you. That accent of yours is something else, Jace added with a grin. Yeah, what are you even doing here? Ridgeview ain't exactly charity. Ariel kept her chin steady despite the heat spreading across her cheeks. She'd heard comments like this before too many times, in too many schools. The same tone, the same smirks, the same confidence of boys who thought the world bent around them. I transferred, she said softly but clearly. That's all. Her voice wasn't shaking. She refused to let it. But Brock's eyebrows lifted like she had somehow offended him by not sounding terrified. That's all? He repeated mockingly. New girl, you don't just transfer here. Kids like you don't show up unless something went wrong. The others laughed, loud and cruel. Ariel held his gaze again, even though every instinct told her to look away, to shrink, to disappear, but she didn't move. Didn't give him the satisfaction, and that was what irritated him. Brock stepped closer until she could see the faint scar under his left eye, the one everyone said he got in a championship football game. He smelled like sweat and arrogance. What's with that look? He demanded. You got something to say? Ariel shook her head once, calm, controlled. No. It wasn't the answer he wanted. Without warning, he shoved her shoulder. Hard. Her backpack slid off her arm and crashed onto the pavement. The impact cracked the silence. Ariel instinctively reached for it, but Brock bent down first. Oh, my bad, he said sweetly, picking it up with exaggerated care. Didn't mean to drop your little bag. For one deceptive moment, it looked like he might actually hand it back. His posture softened, voice lowered. Tyler even muttered, Bro, chill, that's enough. But Brock wasn't done. He tightened his grip, then hurled the backpack onto the ground with a violent snap. The zipper split open. Notebooks, folders, pens scattered across the asphalt like a burst of color against gray concrete. Oops, he said, shrugging. Must have slipped. The group burst into hysterical laughter. Ariel knelt quickly, hands trembling as she grabbed her papers, her textbooks, the photo of her mother that fluttered face down beside a tire mark. She tried to breathe, to stay steady, to hold in the humiliation clawing up her throat. Brock stood over her, blocking the sun. You're awful quiet, he said. Where'd that attitude go? Ariel paused. Then she lifted her head and looked directly into his eyes. Not with fear, not with apology, but with a calm, unwavering strength that didn't belong to a girl kneeling on the ground. For the first time, the smirk on Brock's face faltered. Just a little, Tyler noticed. Yo, Brock! She's staring you down. Something flickered in Brock's expression: annoyance, surprise, something sharper and uglier. What? He snapped. You think you're tough or something? He leaned in, close enough for his shadow to swallow her completely. Let's see how tough you look when you're on your knees for real. He smiled, then slow, cruel, delighted by his own threat. You think you're strong? Let's see how pretty you kneel when I make you fall. Ariel's heartbeat stuttered. She shifted back, preparing to stand, but Brock stepped forward again, closing the distance before she could move. Everything was about to break. The wind cut sharply between the two long academic buildings, funneling through the narrow passage like a warning that nobody listened to. The sky above dimmed slightly, a cloud passing over the sun, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Ariel stood in the center of that tightening corridor of concrete and echoing footsteps, her books clutched to her chest, her breath shallow. Brock's shadow loomed over her. Get up, he growled. She tried, but before Ariel could even straighten her spine, Brock's hand shot forward. He grabbed the front of her shirt, fingers curling brutally into the fabric, and yanked her toward him. The force ripped a gasp from her lungs. Her feet barely had time to reposition before the world snapped into violence. Brock's knee drove upward, fast, merciless, precise. The impact hit her stomach like a hammer. Ariel's body folded instantly. A sharp, strangled cry tore from her throat as the pain exploded through her abdomen. Her books scattered again. Her knees buckled, The concrete beneath her felt far away, and then painfully close as she collapsed onto it, palms scraping the asphalt as she tried to catch her breath. Behind Brock, his crew erupted. "Damn!" Tyler yelled, laughing. "Bro, you knocked the air out of her," Mason hollered. Jace lifted his phone like he was filming a highlight reel. "Yo, do that again." Their cheers bounced off the walls like a twisted halftime show. Ariel clutched her stomach, her breath coming in broken gasps. Tears blurred her vision not from fear, not even from humiliation, but from the raw, physical shock of the hit. Her ribs throbbed, her lungs spasmed. She tasted bitterness at the back of her throat. A few students at the far end of the hallway froze, staring. One girl covered her mouth in horror. A boy whispered, "Should we do something?" But his friend tugged his arm. "Don't. That's Brock. You want to get beat next?" So they stood still, watching, pretending, hoping they wouldn't be noticed. Ariel forced herself onto her knees, but her arms shook violently under her. She blinked hard, trying to focus, trying to push away the fear clawing up her spine. But Brock wasn't finished. Not even close. He stepped around her slowly, like a predator admiring the result of the first strike. "You see?" he said smugly. "That's your place. Right there." He tapped her cheek with 2 fingers. Ariel flinched, but she didn't look away. That stubborn spark in her eyes, the same one that had irritated him earlier, flared again, even through the pain. And Brock hated it. "Still staring!" he snapped. "Fine. I'll make sure you learn your lesson." He grabbed her shoulder to pull her up for another hit. But at that exact moment, someone else moved. Far across the lot, beside the black Harley that gleamed like a coiled beast in the sun, Cole Maddox rose from his seat. Not slowly, not casually. He stood so sharply, the metal kickstand scraped the pavement with a metallic bite. His entire demeanor changed. Ariel didn't see him. Brock didn't notice him. No one in that little circle of cruelty realized that the dynamic of the entire afternoon had just shifted. But Cole did. His eyes had locked onto the thin silver bracelet around Ariel's wrist, the one that dangled loosely as she tried to push herself up, a bracelet bearing the insignia he knew by heart. An insignia that didn't belong to random students or charity auctions. It belonged to the families protected by the Hells Angels. Cole's jaw clenched, his fists curled. His breath came slower, deeper, colder. "Son of a bitch," he muttered, the words barely audible beneath the wind. Then, darker. "They just laid hands on one of ours." He reached into his leather jacket, fingers sliding over the screen of his phone. And with that single motion, the first spark of retaliation ignited. Everything that followed would come fast and violent. At the far edge of the parking lot, where the asphalt cracked into gravel and the afternoon sun burned low across the horizon, Cole Maddox stood beside his black Harley, an enormous machine of chrome and matte steel that hummed even when it wasn't running. The wind whipped his jacket, carrying the faint echo of the commotion happening yards away. He didn't look at the chaos directly anymore. He didn't need to. He'd already seen enough. A kid barely 16 kneeling on the pavement, clutching her stomach from a blow that could have ruptured something. A pack of teenage vultures laughing like it was entertainment. And that bracelet, that damn bracelet glinting against her skin like a distress signal. Cole's fingers moved with lethal precision as he pulled his phone from inside his jacket. No hesitation, no second guessing. The situation had crossed a line the moment Brock Miller's knee connected with Ariel's ribs. He tapped a single number, not a contact, not a name, a code, a call that only certain members of the Hells Angels were allowed to make. The line clicked once, no ringtone, no delay. A voice answered, gravelly, and clipped. "Command." Cole didn't waste time. "A kid's been hit," he said, his voice low and metallic, stripped of emotion. Bracelet confirmed family under protection. Sending coordinates now. The silence that followed wasn't confusion or disbelief. It was the kind of silence made by men who understood the weight of those words. Men who had buried brothers. Men who had sworn oaths. Cole could almost hear the shift. the internal gears of the club locking into motion. When the response came, it was a single sentence, delivered like an execution order. Received. Rapid unit en route. ETA 5. Cole nodded once, jaw tightening. 5 minutes. Good. Long enough for him to still be here when hell arrived. He slid the phone back into his jacket, but his hand lingered against the leather, flexing, curling into a fist that strained against the seams. His breath moved slowly through his chest, controlled, but edged with fury. Because the part no one else at Ridgeview knew, the part even the principal would never dare ask, was that Cole Maddox wasn't just another biker passing through town. He was a ranking officer in the club's protection division, a handler, a guardian. And families who wore the bracelet Ariel had on her wrist, they were the ones the angels had claimed as their own. They were under his watch. He turned his head sharply, gaze locking back onto the scene unfolding down the lot. Brock Miller was still standing over Ariel, his body language vibrating with ugly triumph. Tyler and the others flanked him like hyenas, their laughter ricocheting off the brick walls. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed, no idea who they'd just touched. Cole's pulse thumped harder, not with fear, not with adrenaline, but with a cold, sharpened purpose. He angled his stance toward them, boots scraping lightly against the gravel. His eyes narrowed, a storm contained in human form. Everything about him radiated danger, the controlled kind, the focused kind, the kind that didn't bark warnings. Men like him didn't threaten. They delivered. He clenched his fist until the knuckles cracked. A small, dangerous sound. "Damn idiots," he muttered under his breath. "They don't even know whose kid they just put on the ground." His gaze hardened further. Brock lifted his foot again, preparing to strike Ariel the second time, this one aimed lower, nastier, meant to break something. Cole's jaw flexed. He stepped forward slightly, body angled like a wolf catching the scent of blood. It took everything in him not to intervene early, but he didn't move yet, because in less than 5 minutes, he wouldn't be approaching this situation alone. He'd be approaching it with 40 men who didn't tolerate injustice. And as Brock's leg pulled back, ready for another brutal strike, Cole whispered, "Hold on, kid. Help's already coming." Ariel was still on her knees, one hand braced on the asphalt, the other pressed weakly to her stomach. Each breath stabbed like a blade, shallow and trembling. The world around her blurred at the edges, but she forced herself not to collapse fully, not in front of them, not like this. Brock saw the struggle, and it didn't soften him. It excited him. "Well, look at that," he sneered. "Still trying to sit up? Cute." He rolled his shoulders, taking a step back only to swing his leg forward with deliberate menace. He wasn't aiming for her stomach this time, he was aiming lower, crueler, the kind of kick designed not just to hurt, but to humiliate. Tyler let out a whistle. "Oh, damn. This is gonna be good." Mason, already holding his phone, lifted it higher. But Jace, always the one hungry for social media clout, beat him to it. He flipped open his TikTok camera, grinning like this was premium content served up on a silver platter. "Yo," Jace said, angling the camera so Brock and Ariel fit perfectly in frame. "Watch this go viral. Hashtag Ridgeview Heat, bro." Tyler laughed. "Post it. Everyone's gonna lose their minds." The red recording dot blinked. Ariel's pain-strained face was centered. Brock's lifted foot hovered just inches from her. Ariel lifted her head barely, but enough for the camera to catch her eyes. They were filled with pain, yes, glassy with the impact. But behind all of that, there was something unbroken, something quietly defiant. A flicker of dignity, refusing to die. And Brock hated that flicker. Hated that after the hit he'd landed, she still had anything left to show. "Oh, you think you're strong?" he taunted. "Think that look means something?" His foot rose higher, ready to crush the last shred of her composure. Ariel took in a slow, painful breath. She didn't beg, she didn't cower. Her lips barely parted as she whispered, "Stop." But Brock only grinned wider. "That's the point." He swung his leg back, and then a voice cut through the air like a gunshot. "Hey, stop." The sound was guttural, deep, and carried a weight no teenager could ever replicate. It cleaved through the laughter, the cruel anticipation, and even Brock froze mid-motion. His foot hovered awkwardly, balance shifting. Tyler's grin collapsed. Mason lowered his phone. Jace stopped recording. All four turned. Cole Maddox was no longer standing beside his Harley. He was marching toward them long strides, boots pounding the pavement, rage carved into every line of his face. He looked like he'd been pulled straight out of a storm cloud, fists clenched so tight the leather of his gloves strained. His jaw was locked. His eyes were murderous. But Brock wasn't intimidated. Not yet. "The hell is your problem, old man?" Brock barked back, annoyed at the interruption. Cole didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on Ariel, then flicked to the bracelet again, confirming what he'd already known. His nostrils flared. But before Brock could puff his chest and posture like he always did, another sound cracked open the silence. A low rumble. Faint at first, barely noticeable, but growing. Brock frowned, squinting toward the distant road. What the rumble deepened, became a growl, then a roar. A roar Brock had never heard before, but that Cole recognized instantly. Motorcycles. Harleys. Many of them. The kind of sound you don't just hear, you feel in your teeth, in your bones, in the pit of your stomach. Tyler looked around nervously. "You guys hear that?" Mason swallowed hard. "That's a lot of bikes." Jace turned off his recording completely. Brock took a step back, confusion wrinkling his forehead. What the hell is going on? The engines grew louder, closer. Dozens of them. Cole's eyes sharpened with a chilling calm. It was starting. The rumble grew into something monstrous. It wasn't just noise anymore, it was a vibration crawling across the asphalt, rattling loose gravel, shaking the metal fences lining Ridgeview High's parking lot. Dust rose in thin spirals as the entire ground seemed to tremble under invisible weight. Ariel, still hunched in pain, lifted her head weakly. Brock's crew instinctively stepped back, their bravado cracking like thin glass. And then, the first Harley appeared. It shot around the corner of the access road, like a black bullet, chrome flashing under the late afternoon sun. The engine snarled, echoing off the brick walls. The biker on top, a massive figure in a black leather vest with a skull and wings patch, didn't slow down until he was directly facing Brock and his posse. Then came the second Harley, the third, the fifth. Within seconds, the quiet high school parking lot transformed into a thunderous corridor of engines, exhaust, and the unmistakable sound of men arriving with purpose. Tyler's face drained of all color. Mason whispered, "Dude, we need to go." Jace took an involuntary step back, clutching his phone like it might shield him. But Brock stayed planted barely. His knees tightened, his shoulders locked, his jaw clenched in a mocking attempt to stay cool. He spat on the ground, trying to mask the instinctual fear clawing at the back of his throat. "Relax," he muttered. "It's just some bikers." But by the time the 10th Harley rolled in, headlights piercing the air like twin blades, even Brock couldn't convince himself of that. Cole Maddox stood at the center of it all, silent as stone, watching the cavalry arrive. The wind whipped his jacket, but his eyes stayed fixed on one person, Ariel. The engines finally quieted only slightly as nearly a dozen bikes lined up in a perfect, practiced formation. Then another wave arrived, and another. When the final machine growled to a stop, over 20 Harleys filled the lot. The air shifted. It thickened. It became heavy with something ancient and dangerous. The first biker swung off his bike, a massive figure with arms like tree trunks, tattoos snaking up his neck, and a vest covered in patches earned through years of loyalty and violence. His boots hit the ground with a thud that echoed. He walked past Cole, who didn't move, didn't speak. They didn't need to exchange words. The giant biker crouched beside Ariel, but not too close. His voice, when it came, was strangely gentle. "Can you hear me, sweetheart?" Ariel blinked in confusion, pain pulsing through her ribs. Brock, finally losing grip on his swagger, snapped, "What the hell is this? Who are you people?" The giant man ignored him completely. He looked over Ariel's wrist, saw the bracelet glinting against her skin. He stood up slowly, turning to Cole. "She wearing the band?" Cole's answer was a single, lethal nod. Everything changed in an instant. The biker giant's entire demeanor hardened into steel. The air around him crackled as if electricity were humming beneath his skin. He turned not to Ariel, not to Cole, but to Brock. And when their eyes met, Brock finally felt fear. Real fear. The giant biker stepped forward until he stood only a few feet from the trembling boy. His shadow swallowed Brock completely. His voice was low enough to shake bone. "Son, you just made the biggest mistake of your life." Brock swallowed hard. His throat clicked audibly. Tyler whispered, "Brock, dude, what did you do?" But the giant biker wasn't finished, not even close. Behind him, the rest of the angels began stepping off their bikes, one by one, like a silent army marching into battle. Boots hitting pavement, leather creaking, chains rattling. 50 eyes locked on the small group of teenagers who suddenly looked like prey instead of predators. Brock took a shaky step back, but the giant man stepped forward, matching him stride for stride. Ariel watched through blurred vision, barely able to keep her eyes open, but she saw it. The shift in power, the instant the hunters became the hunted. And the storm had only just begun. If the first wave of bikes felt like thunder, the second wave felt like the sky itself collapsing. The ground vibrated harder than before, so fiercely that loose pebbles skittered across the asphalt, and the windows of nearby classrooms trembled in their frames. Students still inside stopped mid-sentence, eyes widening as the roar swelled into something primal and violent. And then, more. Harleys. Dozens. An army. One after another. Chrome beasts rolled into the Ridgeview parking lot, forming a semicircle that expanded, thickened, and tightened around the scene. By the time the engines cut off, 40 Hells Angels stood in a perfect perimeter, surrounding Brock and his little pack like wolves closing in on wounded prey. Ariel, still curled slightly on the ground, felt the vibrations through her palms, the heat of exhaust, the weight of boots thudding onto pavement. She glanced up just long enough to see a wall of black leather and skull patches enclosing her like a fortress. The boys had nowhere to go. Tyler's mouth hung open. Mason's hands began shaking. Jace, usually glued to his phone, lowered it slowly, his face pale as moonlight. But Brock tried to stand tall, his shoulders squared, his glare sharpened. His voice rose, desperate to sound defiant. But he wasn't fooling anyone, least of all himself. The angels moved inward, tightening the circle. Their shadows stretched long and predatory over the pavement. The lot fell so quiet that even Ariel's ragged breathing could be heard. A biker with a jagged scar across his cheek spat on the ground near Brock's feet. "You put your knee into a kid already on the ground?" he said, voice rumbling like gravel under a truck. "Bold. Real bold." Another biker stepped forward, crossing his massive arms. "Let's see," he growled. "How long you last on your knees." The words dropped like a blade. Tyler stumbled backward into Jace. Mason let out a choked sound that wasn't quite a word. Brock took a step back, but the giant biker from earlier stepped forward simultaneously, blocking him, herding him like cattle. Cole Maddox stood on the edge of the circle, silent, watching, the storm in his eyes heavy enough to suffocate the entire lot. The atmosphere crackled, like a fuse had been lit, like violence was waiting for the slightest spark. And then, click. A sound broke through the tension. A phone. Someone was live streaming. A sophomore girl hidden behind a row of parked cars whispered breathlessly into her camera, "Oh my God, it's 40 Hells Angels at Ridgeview. They're surrounding Brock Miller. You guys, this is insane." The chat exploded instantly. Heart emojis. School emojis. "What did he do?" "Bro's dead." "Keep streaming." And the worst part? Brock heard it was live. His face drained. Fear replaced arrogance in a single heartbeat. Tyler hissed, "Dude, we're on camera, this is everywhere." Mason whispered, "We're so screwed, man." But Brock snapped back into delusion. clinging to the last scrap of ego he had left. He puffed out his chest, turned toward the biker circle, and barked. "We're not scared of a bunch of old bikers." The words echoed into the tense silence. For a moment, a single, horrifying moment. Nothing happened. Then 40 men laughed. Not a friendly laugh. Not amusement. A cold, sharp, humorless laugh, the kind that made the air drop 10 degrees and made the hairs on the back of your neck stand straight. A laugh that said, "You've just chosen death." Ariel felt her breath hitch. Even Cole raised an eyebrow. And the giant biker closest to Brock stopped laughing first. Slowly, he leaned in until his nose was inches from Brock's. His voice dropped to a whisper that could puncture steel. "Oh, kid, you shouldn't have said that." Brock swallowed hard. And it was only going to get worse. Dark clouds rolled over Ridgeview like a slow-moving warning, blotting out the sun until the entire parking lot dimmed into a cold, steel-gray shadow. Thunder murmured somewhere beyond the hills, as though the sky itself was holding its breath. The circle of 40 Hell's Angels closed tighter, leather jackets creaking, boots grinding against the asphalt. Ariel sat on the ground, still clutching her ribs, her breathing shallow. Brock and his friends stood trapped at the center of the biker ring, nowhere to run, no one to help, nothing to hide behind. Then the crowd parted. A man stepped forward. He moved with the calm authority of a judge walking into a courtroom, his presence eclipsing everyone else in the lot. Razor Kane, president of the regional Hells Angels chapter, was not the largest man in the group, but he was the one every angel looked at before they moved, breathed, or acted. A heavy chain hung from his belt. His vest was lined with patches earned from decades of loyalty. His gray beard framed a jaw carved from iron, his eyes cold and sharp as surgical blades locked directly onto Ariel. When he spoke, the entire lot fell silent. "What did they do to you, sweetheart?" His voice was deep, gravelly, but startlingly gentle. The contrast made Ariel swallow hard. Her lips trembled as she tried to answer. He need me," she whispered, hard, twice. I couldn't breathe." And they laughed. Razor's expression darkened. A storm inside a storm. He turned his head slowly toward Brock, who instantly stiffened like prey caught in a spotlight. "You," Razor said, "do you have any idea who you just laid your hands on?" Brock opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Tyler nudged him desperately. Mason whispered, "Say something, dude." But Brock could barely form a sound. Finally he stammered, I didn't hit her that hard. She's exaggerating." The excuse was pathetic, and Razor wasn't buying it. Before Brock could finish, one of the bikers stepped forward and shoved a phone directly into Razor's hand. "Got it on video," the biker growled. "Everything." Razor watched the footage for all of 3 seconds, his jaw tightened. Then, without warning, the biker grabbed Jace, the one who had filmed earlier, and ripped the phone from his trembling grip. "Hey, that's my crunch!" The biker crushed the phone in one hand. Pieces of plastic and glass fell to the ground like confetti from hell. Jace gasped, horrified. Tyler flinched. Mason looked like he might faint. Razor didn't even look at the destroyed phone. His eyes stayed locked on Brock. "You made the mistake of thinking she was alone," Razor said, voice low, steady, deadly. "You thought you could hurt her and walk away like nothing happened." He took one step closer, boots echoing like hammer strikes. "You thought she was nobody." Brock swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing violently. Razor leaned in, eyes burning into him like flame to gasoline. "She's not nobody," Razor said. "Her father is an honorary member of our brotherhood. He saved one of our own, and we protect his family until the day we die." The truth detonated in the center of Brock's chest. Plot twist #5 hit him harder than his knee had hit Ariel. His face drained to a sick, ghostly white. Tyler whispered, "Oh my God." Mason stared at Brock like he'd personally dragged them into hell. Jace took 2 steps back, shaking like a leaf. Ariel stared at Razor in shock. She had known her father had been a good man, brave, respected. But this level of loyalty, this level of vengeance, she had never imagined it. Razor stepped back, folding his arms. "Now," he said, voice dropping to a cold verdict. "What happens next? That's not up to me." Every biker looked at him. Even Brock lifted his head slightly, desperate to know the sentence. Razor turned slowly, deliberately toward the girl still kneeling in pain. "It's up to her." Brock's eyes widened in horror. Ariel's breath hitched, and the entire parking lot froze. The parking lot had never been this silent. Not during finals week. Not during fire drills. Not even during lockdown scares. It was the silence of a graveyard, cold, heavy, suffocating. 40 Hells Angels stood unmoving in a ring of leather and steel, their towering silhouettes blocking the fading daylight. Brock and his crew were trapped at the center, trembling under the weight of hundreds of watching eyes, both in person and on the live stream that was now climbing past 5,000 viewers. Ariel, still clutching her ribs, struggled to her feet. Her legs shook. Her breaths were uneven. But she stood anyway. She had to, not because she felt strong, but because she refused to let Brock's knee be the last thing that defined her. Razor Kane stepped forward, his boots thudding like a judge's gavel. He looked at Ariel not as a victim, not as a fragile kid, but as someone whose voice mattered. "What do you want them to face?" Razor asked, his tone both gentle and deadly. "It's your call, sweetheart. You say it, and it happens." Brock let out a choking sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Tyler grabbed his arm. Mason whispered frantic prayers. Jace nearly dropped to his knees preemptively. Ariel swallowed hard. 40 men stared at her. The entire student body was watching online. Even the clouds paused overhead. She could ask for revenge. She could ask for violence. She could ask for every bone in Brock's body to be broken. But that wasn't who she was. So she lifted her chin and said, voice soft but unwavering, "I want him to apologize." Brock blinked, confused. "That's it?" But Ariel wasn't done. "Publicly," she continued. "Right here, right now. Loud enough for everyone watching to hear." Razor arched an eyebrow. "Anything else?" Ariel nodded. "He needs to tell the school what he did. Face the principal. Face the board. Face the consequences." Brock sagged in relief, thinking he'd gotten off easy. But then Ariel breathed out, voice steadier than before. "And one more thing." Razor paused. "So tell us." Ariel turned her eyes toward Brock, eyes full of every bruise, every humiliation, every moment she'd spent trying to breathe after his knee crushed her ribs. "Not just me," she said. "He has to apologize to everyone he's ever bullied." The words detonated like a grenade. Brock's relief collapsed into pure terror. His face crumpled. His knees shook. Tyler whispered, "Bro, you gotta be kidding me." Mason covered his mouth. Jace stared at the ground, ashamed. Razor crossed his arms. "You heard the girl." Brock's voice cracked. I can't. I didn't. It wasn't." A heavy hand landed on his shoulder. Not a comforting hand. A warning hand. Razor Kane's. "Get on your knees," Razor said quietly. "Right where you made her kneel." Brock's last shred of pride evaporated. His legs buckled. He sank down onto the rough asphalt, the same place he had forced Ariel down like she was beneath him. Now he was the one looking up. He couldn't hold it in anymore. Tears spilled, hot, messy, humiliated tears. He tried to swallow the sobs, but they clawed their way out anyway. His shoulders shook. His hands trembled on the ground. The boy who thought he ruled Ridgeview looked like nothing now. Nothing but a scared kid facing the real world for the first time. Ariel watched him cry, not with satisfaction, but with a strange, quiet ache. Justice felt heavy, even when it was deserved. But before any of them could speak, before Razor could deliver the final instruction, a sudden flash of red and blue lit up the parking lot. Whoop, whoop. A police cruiser swung around the corner, sirens slicing through the storm-thick air. Razor's hand tightened on Brock's shoulder. Ariel stiffened. Cole Maddox shifted his weight, eyes narrowing. This wasn't over, not even close, and the law was about to walk into a war they didn't understand. The wail of a siren ripped through the charged stillness of the parking lot, slicing across the heavy air like a blade. Red and blue lights splashed against the rows of motorcycles and the grim faces of the Hells Angels. The entire circle turned sharply toward the entrance as a police cruiser skidded to a stop, tires screeching. Two officers exited quickly, hands near their holsters, but it was the man stepping out from the driver's side who commanded the most attention. Police Chief Dalton, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, a permanently stressed jawline, and a reputation for avoiding conflicts he couldn't win. His expression tightened the moment he saw the 40 leather-clad figures standing shoulder to shoulder in the Ridgeview High parking lot. "Everyone stay where you are," he barked, trying and failing to project authority over a group that could swallow him whole. Razor Cain didn't even turn toward him at first. He simply placed one more heavy hand on Brock's shoulder, pinning him in place like an insect under a thumb. Chief Dalton cleared his throat nervously. "I'm ordering all of you to disperse immediately," he repeated. "This is a school zone, and you're obstructing." "Obstructing?" Razor finally turned, voice cutting sharply through the air. "We're not obstructing anything." Dalton flinched but held his ground. "Sir, with all due respect," Razor stepped closer, slow and deliberate. "That boy," he pointed at Brock, who was still kneeling and crying, "just assaulted a minor. On school property. We have it on video." Cole Maddox stepped forward and extended a phone, displaying the exact moment Brock's knee slammed into Ariel's ribs. The blood drained from Dalton's face. That's serious." But still, Razor cut him off. "We are not interfering with law enforcement. We're protecting a victim until you do your job." Ariel stood shakily between Cole and Razor, her hand clutching her side, her voice thin but audible. "He hit me," she whispered, "twice." Dalton's gaze flicked from her bruised abdomen to her pale, trembling face, and then his eyes locked onto the bracelet dangling from her wrist. The breath caught in his throat. He staggered back a half step. "This girl," Dalton muttered, voice cracking. "This girl who is her father." Razor's lips curled into the faintest shadow of a smile, not warm, not kind, but coldly satisfied. "The man you've spent 10 years avoiding every time he walked into a courtroom," Razor said. "The man who saved one of ours, and a man you know damn well is protected by us." Dalton's jaw dropped. "Eh? Ariel Johnson?" he stammered. "As in Judge Marcus Johnson's daughter?" Ariel looked confused, still trying to catch her breath, but Dalton looked terrified. Judge Marcus Johnson wasn't just any judge. He was the one who had nearly cost the city's chief of police his career in a corruption scandal. The one Dalton owed. The one Dalton feared crossing at all costs. And now his daughter was kneeling, beaten, bruised, surrounded by 40 men who would gladly lay waste to anyone who harmed her. Dalton swallowed hard. Authority evaporated from his voice. "Stand up," he ordered Brock, except it wasn't an offer. It was a command drenched in fear. Brock didn't move, couldn't move. A biker behind him lifted him by the collar and shoved him forward. Dalton snapped the cuffs onto Brock's wrists so fast the metal clicked like gunfire. "You're under arrest for assaulting a minor," Dalton said, voice trembling. "And for endangering a protected family," Brock sobbed, snot mixing with tears. Tyler, Mason, and Jace stared in horror. But Dalton wasn't done. Not even close. He straightened abruptly, turning his attention to the rest of Brock's crew. "And what about the rest of you?" he muttered, stepping toward them. Razor cracked his knuckles. "Yeah, Chief," he said. "What about them?" This wasn't over. Not for the other boys. The storm clouds finally began to crack open overhead, a low rumble shaking the sky as the air grew thick with the scent of rain. In the middle of the parking lot, the Hells Angels stood like silent statues, while Chief Dalton and his officers moved in to deal with the rest of Brock's entourage. If Brock looked defeated, the boys behind him looked worse. Tyler's face was ghost-white. Mason's hands trembled violently. Jace's phone remained in his palm, but his fingers had gone numb around it. "Step forward," one officer ordered. The three boys hesitated then, as if on cue. Panic erupted. "It wasn't my idea," Tyler blurted. He pushed Jace forward. "He was the one recording." Jace spun around, eyes wild. You told me to record, you idiot, Mason said. I didn't say anything, Mason snapped, pointing frantically at Tyler. Brock started it, and he told us not to say no. Tyler's voice cracked. We didn't even hit her. Brock's the one who… You laughed, Cole Maddox said quietly. The boys froze, turned, found him staring at them like a judge passing sentence. And you watched, Cole added. You watched and did nothing. Razor Kane stepped forward, his presence alone pulling every ounce of noise out of the boys' throats. It's funny, Razor murmured, how tough kids like you suddenly forget how to stand tall when someone bigger shows up. Tyler whimpered. Mason's breathing turned shallow. Jace looked like he'd crumble into tears. The officers didn't need to push them. The boys fell apart on their own, scrambling to escape blame, pointing fingers with shaking hands. Told you they'd fold, one biker muttered. Chief Dalton pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling sharply as he motioned his officers. Separate them. Interview individually. Document everything. Every shove, every insult, every laugh. The officers pulled the three boys apart, leading them to different corners of the lot. Their voices rose and overlapped, whining, pleading, contradicting each other in real time. He said to follow him. I didn't want to do it. It was supposed to be a joke. Ask him, he made us. I barely touched her. I didn't touch her at all. The thin fabric of their so-called friendship shredded instantly. Whatever unity they had while laughing over Ariel's pain evaporated the second accountability showed up. A biker snorted. Some brotherhood they got. Chief Dalton ignored the comment but didn't disagree. He scribbled notes rapidly, frustration carving deep lines into his face. Assault, harassment, aiding, and abetting, he muttered as he wrote. This is going straight to the district board, and the school board, and the juvenile office. One of the officers added, We'll compile statements, grab the footage, and forward everything for charges. Ariel, still shaky, leaned slightly into Cole Maddox's arm as she held her ribs. Razor gave her a small nod, strong, reassuring, as if to say, It's over now. You're safe. But Cole wasn't smiling. His jaw clenched as he watched the boys being processed. To him, justice wasn't simply paperwork. It was knowing Ariel wouldn't be hurt again. Dalton closed his notebook. That's everything. We'll take it from here. Razor nodded once. See that you do. And with that, Cole placed a steady hand on Ariel's back. Come on, he said softly. Let's get you checked out. Ariel nodded, eyes heavy, breath still thin. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a deep ache that ran from her ribs to her spine. As Cole guided her toward the exit, the angels parted, forming a protective corridor around her. It was finally time for her to get the medical help she needed. The school nurse's office was dim and quiet, lit only by a single overhead lamp and the soft glow of dusk pressing through the blinds. The chaos of the parking lot felt distant here, muted, sealed behind walls and closed doors. Ariel sat on the padded exam table, one hand pressed gently to her ribs as she breathed slowly through the ache. Cole Maddox stood near the counter, arms crossed, jaw still tense even though the danger had passed. Razor Kane leaned against the doorway like a silent sentry, his leather vest creaking with every shift of his weight. Ariel finally broke the quiet. What? What were all of you doing there? She whispered, confusion coating every word. Why did they come for me? I don't understand. Cole looked down at her wrist, the bracelet still dangling loosely, its small silver emblem catching the fluorescent light. He stepped forward, lifting her hand gently between his fingers. You see this? Cole asked. You've had it a long time, haven't you? Ariel nodded. It was my dad's. My mom said it mattered. But she never told me why. Cole exhaled slowly, as if choosing each word with care. That's not just any bracelet, kid. That emblem belongs to Manny Johnson. Ariel blinked. That's my uncle. But he died before I was born. Cole nodded once. Manny wasn't just your uncle. He was one of us. A brother. A man who saved lives more than once. Your dad was with him the night it happened. Manny took a bullet meant for another angel. He didn't make it. But because of him, others did. Ariel's breath caught. My mom told me he died a hero. I didn't know what that meant. Razor stepped into the room now, his voice softer than it had been all day. When one of ours goes down protecting his brothers, Razor said, we make a promise to his family. A lifelong one. He gestured to the bracelet. That symbol means you're under that promise, your family. Protected. Respected. Not because of debt. Not because we owe something. But because Manny died believing in the kind of people worth saving. Ariel stared at the emblem, as if seeing it for the first time. It really meant all that? Cole nodded. We don't give these to outsiders, only to the families of the fallen. If any man wearing this patch sees that bracelet, they come running. Ariel swallowed hard. Her voice trembled. Why didn't anyone ever tell me? Razor approached her slowly, placing a heavy, warm hand on her shoulder. Your parents didn't want to drag you into our world, he said. They wanted you to grow up normal, safe. But that bracelet, he lowered his voice, it's not meant to weigh you down. It's meant to lift you up. Ariel's eyes filled suddenly. The room blurred. Razor finished softly. You're protected not because we owe your family something, but because you deserve protection. Because Manny would have wanted it. Because you're worth it. The words cracked something deep inside her. Ariel covered her mouth, shoulders trembling, as tears finally spilled down her cheeks, quiet, raw, overwhelming. Cole rested a hand gently against her back. Let it out, kid. You're safe. And as she cried, surrounded by two men who would have burned the world down to defend her, Ariel finally understood. She had never been alone. The next morning, Ridgeview High buzzed with attention unlike anything it had ever experienced. Students whispered in clusters around lockers, in hallways, at the cafeteria tables. Teachers exchanged uneasy glances, clutching folders of policy paperwork. Every conversation circled back to one thing. What happened in the parking lot yesterday? By 8 a.m., the principal's office had become a war room. Brock Miller sat in a stiff chair, wrists still marked from the handcuffs, eyes swollen from crying. His parents, visibly shaken and embarrassed, argued in hushed tones with the school board, trying to push blame anywhere but their son. But no one was buying it, not when the entire incident had been captured on multiple videos. Suspension was immediate, indefinite, non-negotiable. And the police charges? Those were already being filed. Assault on a minor? Harassment. Intent to cause bodily harm. Creating a hostile environment on school grounds. For a boy used to getting away with everything, the list of charges felt like a death sentence. Brock's father demanded to see the footage. The district superintendent played it silently on a large monitor. The moment Brock's knee slammed into Ariel's stomach, his father went pale. His mother covered her mouth to stifle a sob. They had raised a son who thought cruelty was power. And now the world was watching him fall. As for Tyler, Mason, and Jace, their parents arrived within hours, pulled from work, dragged into emergency meetings with administrators. Each boy received his own form of punishment. 2-week suspension for harassment, mandatory, anti-bullying counseling, permanent mark on their disciplinary records, ban from school extracurriculars, review for potential juvenile charges. Their so-called friendship dissolved instantly in that windowless conference room, replaced by finger-pointing and bitter accusations. He told me to record. He forced me to follow him. I didn't even touch her. It wasn't my idea. No one cared. They were all complicit. They all helped. By lunchtime, the rumors had turned into headlines. Local teen assaults classmate. Biker gang intervenes. Ridgeview High under fire over bullying culture. The district superintendent called an emergency staff meeting. The school counselor drafted a proposal for a new anti-bullying initiative. Teachers began collecting statements from students who mentioned previous incidents. And somewhere along the way, amidst the chaos and administrative panic, Ariel's phone buzzed. At first it was one message, then 3, then 10. By evening, dozens. Messages from students she'd never spoken to, kids she'd passed in hallways, freshmen, seniors, athletes, quiet kids, all thanking her. What you did took courage. I'm sorry I never stood up to them. You made things safer for the rest of us. I was scared of Brock, too. Thank you for not staying quiet. Ariel held her phone tightly as she read each message, her heart warming and aching at the same time. She had never intended to be a symbol. She had never wanted a spotlight. But her pain had cracked open something bigger, a conversation the school had ignored for far too long. Her actions, her survival were inspiring change. That should have been the end of it. A peaceful chapter closing. But as she refreshed her notifications, something else appeared. A shared video. Millions of views. Thousands of comments. The entire confrontation from Brock's blow to the arrival of the Hells Angels had gone viral, and the world was now watching Ridgeview High. The days that followed felt surreal, like Ridgeview High had been shoved under a spotlight it never asked for. News vans hovered near the school entrance. Reporters stood at the curb waving microphones. Parents watched nervously from cars. And every student walked the halls with the same whisper on their lips. Did you see the bikers? They defended her. 40 of them. But the shockwave didn't stop at the school. Across the city, across the entire state, biker communities began responding. The Hells Angels were the first to speak publicly. Razor Kane released a statement that spread rapidly online. Bullying is cowardice. Protecting the vulnerable is not violence, it is duty. Other motorcycle clubs followed, offering support and solidarity. Within hours, biker groups from 3 counties organized a fundraising ride, hundreds of Harleys rolling down the highway in a thunderous show of unity, every engine roaring for Ariel, and every victim afraid to speak up. The donations poured in. By the end of the week, they had raised enough money to fund a brand new anti-bullying action program for Ridgeview High, complete with counseling resources, emergency reporting lines, and peer advocates. The school board was stunned. For years, they had labeled the Angel Bikers as dangerous, reckless, outcasts. Parents had complained about their loud engines near the edge of town. Administrators had quietly discouraged students from associating with people like that. But now, those same dangerous men were the ones who stepped in when no one else did. They were the ones who protected a child until law enforcement arrived. They were the ones helping rebuild the school's broken culture. The hypocrisy was impossible to ignore, and it all led to one moment. The school announced a mandatory assembly. Every student, every teacher, every administrator gathered in the gym. Reporters stood behind the ropes, cameras ready. A podium was placed center stage with a Ridgeview banner draped neatly behind it. Then, Razor Kane walked onto the stage. A hush fell so hard it seemed to suck the air out of the building. Students stared as the leather-clad giant strode to the microphone, flanked by Cole Maddox. Behind them, several angels formed a respectful line, no intimidation, just silent solidarity. But the loudest reaction came when Ariel stepped onto the stage beside Razor. She wore a bandage under her shirt, but her posture was straight, her expression calm. The gym erupted with whispers, some shocked, some supportive, many simply awed. Razor adjusted the mic and addressed the crowd. "We're not here because we're bikers," he said. "We're here because a child was hurt, and protecting children shouldn't be controversial." Students nodded. Teachers exchanged looks of shame and admiration. Then, Razor placed a hand on Ariel's shoulder. This young woman showed more courage than a whole crowd of witnesses put together. She stood up to cruelty. She survived it. And today, she speaks. He stepped back. Ariel approached the microphone slowly. Her fingers trembled for a moment, but only for a moment. When she spoke, her voice carried through the gym with quiet, devastating clarity. Silence helps the bullies more than it helps the victims. The room froze. Dozens of students swallowed hard. Several teachers lowered their heads. You could have heard a pin drop. Ariel took a breath, and the entire school waited for what came next. Ariel stood at the podium, surrounded by the silent weight of hundreds of eyes. 40 Hells Angels formed a protective wall behind her. Teachers lined the bleachers, some tense, some hopeful, Students filled every seat in the gym, kids who had watched, ignored, feared, or survived bullying themselves. Her fingers tightened on the edges of the podium. She wasn't a fighter. She wasn't a hero. She was just a girl who didn't deserve what happened to her. But today, she refused to stay quiet. She took a steady breath, the kind that hurt her bruised ribs, and her voice rose, soft but unshakable. "Everyone thinks bullies want power," she began. "But what they really want is silence." A ripple passed through the room. "They want us scared. They want us embarrassed. They want us too ashamed to speak. Because when we stay quiet, we give them everything they need." A few students bowed their heads. Others wiped their eyes. Ariel continued, her voice growing stronger. "I was hurt. Badly. But the worst part wasn't the pain. It was how many people watched it happen and didn't know what to do. I don't blame anyone. I understand. Fear is real." She scanned the rows of faces. "But silence. Silence is the tool bullies use to keep hurting people. And it only ends when someone decides to speak." She looked directly at the freshman section kids who looked smaller than fear itself. "If you see someone being hurt, say something. Do something. Tell someone. You don't have to fight. You just have to refuse to stay silent." A muffled sob came from somewhere in the crowd. Then another. A teacher in the corner. Mrs. Leonard stood first. Tears streaked her cheeks as she began to clap. Slowly, other teachers rose. Then students, rows upon rows, rising to their feet. The applause swelled into a wave, loud, raw, overwhelming. Ariel didn't cry this time. She simply exhaled, her shoulders relaxing as the sound washed over her. Razor Cain stepped up beside her, placing his heavy hand gently on her shoulder. He leaned close enough for only she and the angels behind them to hear. "You did good, sweetheart," he murmured. "Your uncle would be proud. And listen," he lowered his voice, tone hardening to steel. "If anyone else lays a finger on you, calls you out, threatens you, tries to scare you, anyone at all," he tapped her bracelet, "you call us, and we'll come back." Ariel nodded, a small, grateful smile forming through the ache. But the story didn't end there. Later that evening, the news replayed clips of the assembly. Social media exploded with hashtags supporting Ariel. The biker fundraiser tripled its donations overnight. The district announced immediate policy changes. And somewhere across town, a courtroom door opened. Brock Miller, wrists bound in shackles, was escorted by 2 officers through a hallway lined with reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. He kept his head down, face hollow and defeated. The footage aired everywhere. But that wasn't the last image of the night. Back in her bedroom, Ariel's phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. No profile photo. She frowned and opened it. One sentence appeared on the screen. "This isn't over." She stared at it, throat tightening. The screen flickered again. Another message appeared. Not even close. A chill ran down her spine. The story of Ridgeview High was far from finished, and that's how a single act of cruelty turned into a storm no bully was ready for. Ariel stood back up, not because she was fearless, but because she finally realized she was never alone. And sometimes justice arrives on 2 wheels, with engines loud enough to shake an entire school. Her courage didn't just change her fate, it exposed a system built on silence. Now I want to hear from you. If you were there in that parking lot, what would you have done? If this story hit you hard, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because more stories like this are coming. And trust me, you won't want to miss the next one.